Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar, Strategies for Becoming an Effective Engineering Manager, presented by Patrick Sweet. This webinar is part of the Academic Partnership Webinar Series of the American Society for Engineering Management, ASEM. I'm Oneboye, and I'll serve as the moderator for today's webinar. I have a few opening instructions before I introduce our presenter. During the presentation, all participants will be muted. We'll take questions at the end of today's presentation. However, you may submit your questions to the presenter at any time during the presentation by typing your questions into the chat box in the Zoom control panel. Please make your questions as clear as you can for the presenter. Submitted questions will be addressed during the Q&A session after the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and after the webinar, the recording will be made available on the Society's website and YouTube channel. Now I would like to introduce today's speaker. Patrick Sweet is the president of Tandem Consulting, which specializes in leadership and management development for engineers and engineering firms. He also hosts the popular Engineering and Leadership podcast. Prior to launching Tandem Consulting, Patrick spent 13 years in industry, mainly in rail and defense industries. He has worked as a product manager, a project manager, a systems engineering manager, and as the head of configuration management at a large naval combat systems integrator. So now I'll turn the program over to Patrick. Thanks for joining us today.
Great, thank you so much. I'm very, very excited to be here. I'm just going to share my screen and we'll get this presentation underway. All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm really, really excited to be here with you today to be giving this presentation. This talk is called Strategies for Becoming an Effective Engineering Manager. So we will jump right in. So the goal for today is to teach some of the key skills and knowledge you need to develop today in order to become an effective engineering manager tomorrow. And as is the case for a lot of the talks as part of the academic partnership series, it's geared toward engineering students to some extent, but is also great for early stage professionals and frankly, anyone who wants to become a manager or get better as a manager. So there are three key things that I want to discuss today. The first is the difference between leadership and management. There are some very important differences. Ways to develop practical leadership skills and self-management skills as part of a path toward managing others. And for those of you who stick around at the very end, I've got a free little something for you. I won't spoil the surprise right yet, but do stick around to the end because I do have a little something for you. Before we get started, I just wanted to share a little bit about myself. As was mentioned in the introduction, I'm the president of Tandem Consulting, and our major project right now is something we're calling the Engineering and Leadership Project. Over the last decade, I've led some incredible engineers doing amazing work. You'll see there on the left side of the screen a picture of a train that I helped develop. That's an automated driverless train that is operating today in Kuala Lumpur. I worked as a product manager, chief engineer at Bombardier for some time, and later on moved to Lockheed Martin, where I led several systems engineering teams as part of the Canadian Surface Combatant Program. So that's in the top right, the Canadian Surface Combatant ship, which pound for pound will end up being the most advanced, technically the most advanced warship in the world. And that program is the largest shipbuilding program since the end of the Second World War. So a major undertaking. And during that time, there were two kind of important things that I realized. One is that teams that have excellent leaders and managers can do incredible work. And those teams are a joy to be part of. The second, though, is that most engineers are never given the skills that they really need to thrive as leaders. So those teams with excellent leadership are sorely lacking. And that's why I started the Engineering and Leadership Project, was to equip engineers with the skills, the knowledge, the tools that they need in order to make that jump over into leadership roles. So whether they're formal management roles or not, leadership is still really, really important in the realm of engineering. So this brings us to our first topic, which is the difference between leadership and management. And it's super, super important to understand that while the two are related, they're very different things. And I'll explain what I mean by that. When we're talking about leadership, we're talking about the big picture. We're talking about helping a team do the right things. Whereas in management, whether you're a project manager, a people manager, doesn't really matter. Fundamentally, it's about doing things right. Where leadership is about, what are we doing and why are we doing it, inspiring a team to pursue that. Management is more about the how, who, where, and when, kind of the plan that supports the strategy that a leader is supposed to be coming up with. Where a leader cares more about change and getting from where we are today to where we want to be in the future, management is about control. It's about making sure that when you have a plan in place or you have certain targets or you have a certain approach, that the team stays the course. And one of the other big differences between leadership and management is leadership really cares more about the future. Like I said, getting from here to there. And the bigger picture, where management is concerned mostly about the day-to-day and really getting into the weeds. So I really want to emphasize this, because what this means is that when you talk about leadership, you talk about management, you're talking about the development of different skills. I think we've all worked for managers who were not strong leaders. And I think we've all had the experience of working for strong leaders who, or with strong leaders who maybe weren't in a formal management role. The two are incredibly important. The point here is not to say one is good and the other is bad, so much as they're two sides of the same coin. And the way I like to illustrate this is with my new favorite TV show. It's called Ted Lasso. And if you're not familiar with Ted Lasso, the premise is an interesting one. Ted, who's the man on the left, is an American football coach who's invited over to England to take over a professional soccer team, Richmond FC. And the thing is, Ted doesn't know anything about soccer. He's hardly even watched a soccer game in his life. And against the odds, despite not having any of the technical skill or any of the knowledge of the game, he's a phenomenal leader. He inspires. He cares for his people. He really instills a sense of belief. And you can even see in the top left corner that his believe sign that he put up in the locker room. He's a phenomenal leader, and through that leadership, he's able to bring his team to unlikely levels of success. On the right-hand side, you've got Nate Shelley, who starts off the series as kind of a glorified ball boy, essentially. He's the equipment manager. No one really likes him. No one really talks to him. He's kind of the butt end of most jokes. But Ted gives him an opportunity to kind of strut his stuff. And it turns out Nate is a world-class tactician. He understands the rules of the game. He knows what the team has to do to win. He knows what changes to make on the field in the middle of a game. The problem is that Nate is kind of a jerk. He doesn't start out that way, but it ends up he's a bit of a self-serving jerk. So you've got this situation where Ted is a phenomenal leader while being kind of a crummy manager, and Nate is a phenomenal manager. He understands the rules and can control the game without being much of a leader at all. And in normal real life, you don't get people who are so far skewed to one side or the other. But I think this is a great way to demonstrate the difference between the two. If I'm to leave you with any one big take-home message here, is that leadership is a practice and management is a position. So you can choose to develop and practice the skill set and mindset tied to leadership, even without having a management position. Management is something that someone else promotes you into or installs you in a certain role. You should be a strong leader in order to be a good manager, but that's your choice. Whereas the choice to put you in or take you out of a management role is someone else's. And what this represents is a phenomenal opportunity. So for anyone here who's not currently in a management role, understanding this difference and understanding that leadership is a practice means that this is something that you can develop. okay? And in developing those leadership skills, you can set yourself up to either be a manager in the future or to develop even better management skills than what you have today. So this is really a key take-home message in this discussion about leadership versus management, is no matter where you are, no matter, you could be a senior engineer, you could be the first day on the job at the end of your undergraduate degree, you can develop leadership skills and you can practice leadership skills. And that's what we're going to talk about in this next segment. So this next part that I wanted to share was about developing practical leadership skills. How can you start to develop your leadership skills now? And again, this is really important to do if you want to be either a better leader or a better manager rather, or a manager someday, depending where you are in your career. And luckily, no matter where you are, there are lots of ways you can approach the development of your own leadership, whether or not you have direct reports or not. So let's get into those. So there are 6 things that I'm going to suggest here that I think apply to anyone in the room. Finding your why, developing a vision, sharpening the saw, connecting with your team, working with a coach or mentor, and looking for opportunities to lead. And I'll get into each of these one at a time next. First of the 6, finding your why and really making sense of what's important to you. Speaks to your values. What do you believe is fundamentally good? What's important to you? What gets you out of bed in the morning? And understanding your why is really important, because once you understand why you do what you do, you can kind of push through the dull days. You can push through monotony, whether it's studying or working or whatever the case may be. And when you approach work with your why in mind, you can do some pretty incredible things. The level of self-motivation that you have grows exponentially. And that's good for you as an individual, but it's good for the people around you too, because you can share your why with others. They can start to see in themselves why you guys do what you do. And this is super important no matter what you're doing in life, is understanding that there is a purpose behind the day-to-day activity that you're pursuing. So I've listed a few questions here that I find are helpful when I'm trying to make sense of my why. And I'm going to share my why in a minute here. Ask yourself, who do you serve? Who matters to you? Whose life is going to be affected positively by the work you're doing? Where do you spend your money? Where do you spend your time? Like, these are pointers towards the things that you really value. One of the questions I really like is, what are you willing to wait for? What's worth waiting for or traveling for or being inconvenienced for? If you can make sense of those things that are real kind of practical examples of what you value in your life, you can start to make sense of what motivates you, what drives you. So I mentioned I wanted to share my why. This is just a simple slide that I put together a couple of years ago. I was working in the defense industry and on this huge project, this Canadian Surface Combatant project, and frankly, in a program like that, it can be hard. It can be very difficult at times. There's lots to manage. There's lots to think about. There are cases where, frankly, there's drudgery, if I'm being totally honest. So I found it super helpful to have this reminder right here, that this is my desktop background, to remind me, why is it I'm doing what I'm doing? Why is it that this is a good and valuable and worthy thing in my life? So on the left-hand side is a picture of my daughter playing in Lake Ontario, and I thought it was important for me to do my work to provide her with the future, right? To provide financially for her. And then in the bottom middle is a picture of Citadel Hill, which is my hometown of Halifax, Nova Scotia. And it was a reminder that, I care a lot about my daughter's home and my country, right? So working in the defense industry, this is something that was incredibly motivating. In the top middle, I put a picture of a library because I find it personally incredibly fulfilling to learn and to grow intellectually. And, even when I was dealing with things that were maybe boring or monotonous, if I could remind myself that I was learning and I was improving and I was growing, that gave purpose to that activity. And on the right-hand side, I've got a picture of foosball. And yes, I love soccer. It's twice already that this has come up in my presentation. But the reason I put this picture is if you look kind of toward the back, there's a row of red players who are oriented the wrong way. Their legs are pointing up. And that serves for me as a reminder that when I do what I do, when I'm a strong leader, when I'm a strong manager, I help to make sure that my team is oriented the right way. So when I do my job, I help the red team back there flip their legs so that they're down so that they can play. And this is an important reminder that even if I'm a little bit removed from the day-to-day work, what I'm doing is incredibly important in terms of facilitating the completion of that work. The next thing I wanted to talk about was developing a vision. And when I talk about vision, it can be a little bit hard for people to wrap their heads around, because you think of larger than life characters. You think of guys like Elon Musk who have visions for the future of humanity. And you know, the problem with that is that it can make being visionary a little bit distant, a little bit hard to grasp. You know, if Elon Musk is visionary, then how could I possibly be visionary? Well, it doesn't have to be quite so grandiose. A vision is simply your view of what the future looks like. And it can be applied to anything, whether it's your home life, yourself, your own career, your team, a product, a project, an organization. If you think about the things you complain about, the things that drive you nuts, essentially you're thinking about how things could be better, right? And if you think about what things could be better, you can imagine how things will look in the future if through some means you're able to actually address those problems. That's being visionary. That's having a vision for the future. And if you can imagine that better future, that ties closely to your why, right? There's the purpose behind doing what you do. There's what life will look like if you successfully do what you do. That's your vision. This is incredibly motivating. And again, if you can develop this skill for yourself, that can be applied to your team as well. And this is very, very powerful, having that end in mind as well as your purpose. So one challenge I'll leave with you today is to think about what should the future look like? What does better look like? And choose whatever context makes sense for you, whether it be yourself or your organization. Practicing this skill, regardless of the scope, can still be incredibly powerful. And the challenge is this: write your vision in a page. Even if it's stream of consciousness, that's okay. Just get your thoughts on paper. And once you've done that and you're happy with that, try breaking that down to one paragraph. Really distill it down to something more concrete, something punchy. And then once you've done that, try again. Try to get it down to a single sentence. And if you can do that, then you can communicate your vision easily during meetings or with your colleagues or over coffee. And that's where things get very powerful, both for yourself and for the world around you. The next way you can work to develop practical leadership skills is by sharpening the saw. And sharpening the saw is about just getting better every day. There's a really good quote that I like from Harry Truman. He said, "Not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers." Every leader out there who's really good at their craft is trying to perfect their craft. They're trying to get better in management, in leadership, and in the engineering realm within their technical domain as well. And it doesn't have to be crazy. You don't need to go out and get a master's in something, though you could. But it can also be incredibly valuable to just read in your field. You know, ASEM publishes journals, publishes practice periodicals. This is incredible stuff that's given to you as part of membership within the organization. You can attend conferences and webinars or join societies or earn designations. Courses are incredibly easy to take now with massive open online courses that cost next to nothing. And of course, yeah, you can go and advance your formal education as well. And personally, I've done all of these things. The important bit here is not so much what you do as it is to recognize that you have options, and it's important to pursue those options. And then that puts you in a better spot to serve your project, serve your organization, serve the world around you, which in effect makes you a leader. It's very, very powerful. The next thing I wanted to suggest is to connect with others. And what I mean by connection is just getting to know the people you work with, getting to know your team. It's important when you're leading to recognize that when there's a leader-follower relationship, the follower, in a sense, is vulnerable to the leader. And what I mean by that is they're putting their trust in the leader. They are trusting that the leader has their best interests in mind, that they know what they're talking about, and that if you follow the leader, that good things will happen. That puts someone in a vulnerable spot. And people are not willing to be vulnerable unless they get to like or at least respect you as a person, right? It's hard to imagine trusting someone that you don't like and or respect. I personally can't think of a single instance where I put my trust in someone that I didn't at least respect them. And in order to get to know to get to like and respect someone, you have to get to know them. You have to know them on some personal level. You know, there's a certain amount of respect that comes from your position on an org chart, right? There's a certain element of power there, but it only carries you so far. True trust comes through relationship. So what I'm suggesting here is get to know the people that you work with. And this can be as simple as, you know, joining people for coffee. This could be social nights. This could be games. This could be office Olympics. It doesn't really matter. There are 100 different ways you can get to know your colleagues. The point here is to try to put yourself out there. There's a story I like to tell. I was on a leadership course with a colleague of mine, and I'll call him a colleague because at that point he was not a friend. In fact, this guy rubbed me the wrong way. He came across as brash, as rude. I really didn't like him, frankly. And looking back, that wasn't really fair of me because he hadn't done anything untoward. It was just a bad first impression, and that kind of stuck. Well, during this leadership course, the facilitator asked us to share something unusual about ourselves or something we thought most people didn't know. Well, turns out the guy I didn't like was a drummer. And I'm also a drummer. I love music. I drum every day. And that led me into a conversation with him. What kind of drums do you have? What kind of music do you play? Did you catch that band that showed up last week? And all of a sudden there's a connection. And all of a sudden I'm starting to like this guy. And nothing fundamentally changed about either he or I, other than I had this hook, this little something that opened the door so that my eyes could be open to, okay, he couldn't possibly be all bad. Now, several years have passed since that time, and we've grown into a true relationship. And I wouldn't say we're friends, but I do like the guy, and I do respect him. And now it's easy to see that he is, in fact, a world-class expert in a technical domain that I have no knowledge of, and have been able to work with him through that over the years. So all that to say, it's incredibly important to get to know the people around you. The next suggestion here is to get help, and there are two tools that you can use in order to help develop your leadership skills, and that's coaching and mentoring. And the two are related but different. A mentor is often someone who's been there, done that in whatever domain you happen to find yourself in or you want to develop yourself in. So in this case, if you want to develop your leadership skills, find a leader you respect within your organization and try to develop a mentoring relationship with them, right? This is the kind of thing that can really help you grow and help you learn the lessons that others have had to suffer through learning, right? You get the benefit of someone else having stumbled or tripped or fallen flat on their face. Mentors are often very, very happy to share their experiences with the next generation, right? It helps to leave a legacy, and it's fundamentally a good thing to do. Coaches are a little bit different. Coaches fill a similar role, but generally don't necessarily have the same technical background. What they are very good at is facilitating self-discovery and reflection and introspection. They help you work through and identify the challenges that you're having and come up with concrete plans and hold you accountable for executing those plans. So while they might not necessarily be domain experts, they are experts in helping people through their challenges. So both are super, super important, no matter where you are in your particular career journey. The final thing that I wanted to suggest in terms of developing your leadership skills is learn to lead by leading. And you'd be shocked if you haven't looked at it, but there are incredible opportunities all over the place to put yourself in a position where you have to lead. And generally, what I'm talking about here are volunteer opportunities. If you look at community groups or volunteer organizations, local schools, faith-based groups, your professional engineering chapter, there are always opportunities for people to step in and help out. And frankly, more often than not, excuse me, it's really just a matter of picking up the phone and asking. So if there's a domain you're interested in, or if there's an organization you're interested in, honestly, just identifying that opportunity and showing up and putting yourself in a spot where you can help out is a phenomenal opportunity to learn to lead. And honestly, those skills that you develop transfer very, very nicely into the workplace, particularly if where you're volunteering is a professional organization or society like ASEM, for example. And I'm sure if you asked anyone who's part of a working group or a committee, I'm part of the communications committee with Anne-Marie, there's absolutely a need for help. All you have to do is raise your hand. So that takes us through the development of practical leadership skills. And going back to the beginning of this presentation, the first thing we talked about is the fact that leadership and management are different things. They're related. They're two sides of the same coin, but different skill sets. For the last third of the presentation here, what I'd like to focus on is the development of self-management skills. And again, as I said, this talk is geared primarily to students and folks who are looking in the future to get into management, but I think even for the seasoned managers in the room, you'll find that this is all incredibly helpful. And the better you get at managing yourself, the better you'll be at managing others. You'll also be a lot more forgiving with mistakes when managing yourself. So it's good to practice on your own first. There are three things here that I wanted to cover for managing yourself, three strategies. The first is goal setting. The next is habit hacking, taking advantage of how habits work to help yourself. And the final thing is continuous improvement. But we'll start with goal setting. You can't make sense of your own performance if you don't know what performing means. If you don't know where the goalposts are, you can never score. And as simple as it sounds, as straightforward as it sounds, it's remarkable how many people don't have a firm set of goals that are well structured that they could rattle off the top of their head. And that's not a knock on anyone. That's just a reflection of our how much we value goals and how much we've seen other people set and pursue goals. So where you can start with this, if you don't already have goals for yourself, is really setting those goals both in terms of work performance, right? What does it look like to do a good job of your job? But then also your professional development. What does the better version of me look like? And what am I going to do to get there? And many folks have heard about the SMART framework for goals. But I came across an updated version of this that was first made popular by Michael Hyatt, which I like quite a bit more. And he was clever. He called it the SMARTER framework. So in his framework, each letter represents some characteristic of a goal. A lot of them are the same or similar to the SMART framework, but there are a couple twists that I think are valuable and important. The first is S, a goal should be specific. So there's a big difference between having a goal of wanting to run more and having a goal of, I want to finish the New York City Marathon in under 4 hours by 2023, right? These are very different levels of specificity, and the more specific, the better. That's what helps you understand, have I accomplished this goal or not? The next is measurable. You have to be able to track your progress towards goals. If you can't track progress, it's probably more like a mission or a desire, but you can't accomplish something if you can't measure it. So it's important for it to be measurable. A is actionable. It has to be something you can physically do or take some action toward. If it's not actionable, you can't really take steps. You can't make a plan or execute that plan towards achieving your goal. R is relevant, and this is a little bit different from the original SMART framework. Relevance means it applies to your overall mission and vision for yourself or for your team or for your organization. It has to align with who you are as a person. And that's part of why that vision that I mentioned earlier is so important, is your goals need to help drive you toward that. It has to make sense, in other words. T stands for time keyed, and there are two different ways to apply timing to a goal. One is a deadline, right? I mentioned the goal of running the New York City Marathon by the end of 2023. That's a deadline that's very specific. It's unambiguous as to whether or not I know when I have to accomplish this goal for. But the other way to imbue a kind of time element to a goal is some sort of cadence or rhythm. This is helpful for goals that you're not really after any particular endpoint, but you believe that the process will get you there. So for example, if I had a goal to run 3 days a week, seven weeks out of 8 for the next 6 months, I've got a very specific cadence there. I understand exactly what success means and what it doesn't mean. Now, I would probably also want to say I want to run at least 5 kilometers during each of these runs, right? And then it's even more specific. But that time-keyed element can be either or. Both are very powerful. The E here is exciting. It has to be exciting for you to pursue a goal, especially if it's of any consequence or of any magnitude. If it's the least bit difficult, it has to be something you get excited about. And again, I'll refer back to your why and your vision. Your goals should support that stuff and should bring you toward your idealized view of the future. And if you can do that, then imagine what you can do to inspire a team when you start to set goals for an organization. This is very, very powerful, and something that a lot of people overlook is just how important it is for a goal to be exciting. You have to want to do it, because some days it's going to be ugly. Some days you're not going to want to get out of bed. And if I keep piling on to this running analogy, some mornings it's going to be raining or cold or windy. And if you're not excited about the goal in general, it's going to be very hard to drag your butt out of bed at 5:30 in the morning or whatever it is to keep pursuing this goal. And finally, there's the second R is risky. And this is where a lot of people kind of get confused. It's like, well, why shouldn't the goal be something that is, achievable, right? Why should you have something that's risky? And again, the riskiness ties to the exciting bit, in that you kind of have to aim big for something to be exciting, for you to really push yourself into new territory and achieve your overall mission and vision for yourself. Now, you'll note that R is not ridiculous, right? You don't want to aim so high that it's impossible, but you do want to challenge yourself. And you'll find that when you are willing to take bets on yourself, that it's surprising what all you can achieve. The next thing I wanted to cover here is habit hacking as a way to help manage yourself. And habits are a part of our lives. Often we think of bad habits, but in fact, most habits are actually quite good. And it's important to have habits in our lives. Having habits in place helps to preserve energy, to really invest time and thinking into those things that really need it. It would be a real drag if every single time you woke up in the morning, you had to think deeply about how you were going to get dressed or make breakfast or drive to work. All of those things happen on autopilot, right? There's a routine, and that serves us. The problem is that some habits hurt us and kind of get in the way of our achieving our goals. So if you can learn to harness your habits, you can learn to improve yourself slow but sure. And luckily, once you understand how habits work, you can actually take advantage of the bad habits and use them for your benefit. So all habits have the same three fundamental elements. Some sort of stimulus, a response that you choose to that stimulus, and a reward. So here on the screen, I've got the example. Let's say it's your mid-afternoon break. Let's say it's 3 o'clock. And when the clock strikes 3, you get up from your desk and you go have a snack. Okay, and maybe that snack is a cookie. And that cookie makes you feel good. It fills your belly, it's tasty, it's delicious. And there you have your three elements of a habit. You've got the time, which is your stimulus. You've got the cookie. Eating the cookie is your reaction, your response. And the reward is feeling full and having a tasty treat. And that chain reinforces itself. And that's what makes it a habit. Once you recognize the three elements, you can actually start to hack your own habits and use them for good. So for example, if you want to start losing weight or you want to eat more healthily, a lot of people would say, well, I'm just not going to have cookies anymore. Game over with cookies. And while that's honorable, it's very, very hard to do because you still have the same stimulus and you will be missing the reward, right? So that habit is trying to reassert itself if you just try to stop eating cookies. It's much better to replace that habit with a good one. So what you can do is you can recognize, okay, the time is the trigger and the feeling full and having a tasty treat is the reward. What other way can I complete that same chain? So here, maybe an apple does it for you, right? So you've effectively achieved the goal of eating less sweets. But instead of just trying to stop cold turkey, you've identified an alternative response that you can use to take advantage of that same trigger and that same reward. And if you can use this knowledge to address some other bad habits you have, like maybe it's digging into email first thing in the morning and kind of getting swept up in the day before you've invested time in what's really truly important, which is a major productivity killer, you can really start to take control of your day and of your life in general. In fact, this is very, very powerful stuff. The final thing that I wanted to share is this idea of personal continuous improvement, just getting better each and every day. And learning, especially as we get older and older, as your kids, learning is very, very quick. And I'm the proud owner of a 7-year-old, and she she amazes me on a daily basis what she's able to recall after hearing it a single time. I'm also amazed at times at what she can't recall, despite being told several times. But that's a story for another day. Kids really can learn through just sheer memory. Adults don't learn that way. Adults learn through reflection. And if you don't purposely build in time to reflect on your life and your work, it's very hard to learn from the lessons that have been presented to you. So what I'm suggesting here is to schedule time. Literally book yourself an appointment in your calendar every week, at least once a week, to think back to your goals and your habits, which we've just covered, and think to yourself, well, what's working? What's not working? What have been my wins? What have been my losses? And what can I learn from that? And more importantly, what specific action will I take next week to reinforce the good and deal with the bad? And if you can get into this habit of checking in with yourself, you're acting like your own coach. And that's a habit that over time can yield some incredible results. And if you get into that habit with yourself, then it gets easier to do that with a team in the future. I really view the role of a manager in a technical organization as being a builder of systems. And if you can set up systems for your team to thrive, you will be a good manager. And part of thriving is learning lessons from the past, both the good and the bad, and tweaking the system in order to improve for the future. But it starts with you. It starts with that habit. And it's not hard to do. You just have to make the time to do it. So that covers the majority of the presentation. I just wanted to offer a couple ideas for next steps, that maybe you've been inspired to dig into things. Maybe you want to learn more. What can you do to further develop yourself and move forward in terms of setting yourself up for success and becoming an effective engineering manager? I've got a couple things that I'd like to share with you. I promised at the top of the hour that I had a free little something for you. It's a free ebook that everyone here on the call can download. It's called Engineering Leadership 101. And it's a guide for learning leadership skills no matter where you are in your career. And I've got a link there. I'll actually, once I'm done here, I'll paste that in the comments so that it's easy to click. And then if you'd like to learn more about my work, about the Engineering and Leadership Project, I've got articles, I've got a podcast, coaching courses, all sorts of good stuff there. That's all at engineeringandleadership.com, and I would love to have you by. And like I said, I'll paste that in the comments or in the chat window here in a moment. But that's that. Thank you very, very much, everyone. I'm really happy to have had the opportunity to chat with you today. And as was mentioned off the top, I'll be around for a little bit. I'd be thrilled to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Just as a reminder, you can submit questions by typing them in the chat. So we're going to begin the question and answer portion of the webinar.
Well, thanks so much, everyone. Lots of thanks. I appreciate that. I see a message there from earlier in the presentation asking if my slides can be made available. I could absolutely do that. I know there's going to be this has been recorded so that people can watch the whole the whole webinar after the fact. But I'd be more than happy to make slides the slides themselves available to everyone for sure.
Thank you very much, Patrick.
Yeah, no problem.
I do see some questions in the chat. So the first question is, I missed the first half. Where can I watch the first half? So that's a great question. I can answer that quickly. So with this session, we'll make the recording available after the webinar. So you just check the Society website or the YouTube channel. There's another question here. The question is, what has been your greatest challenge?
What has been my greatest challenge? Probably the single most difficult thing that I've had to encounter. I learned a lot through this experience. Is that is taking a team over from someone else, where cultures and expectations were very, very different. And I had the unfortunate experience. Well, it was actually a phenomenal experience, but very, very difficult. It's taking over a team that was struggling. And really resetting expectations on a team related to what it means to perform, right? What it means to hit goals and targets where frankly that was not the expectation prior to my arriving. So one of the big lessons learned there is that when you are managing a team, you manage performance but lead people. Okay, you never try to manage people, especially in our world. Engineers are professionals. They're knowledgeable. They are hardworking. They want to do good work. And when you try to dictate, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to do it. A, it's not going to work. B, you lose credibility as a leader. And then to borrow an analogy from sports, you lose the locker room. And if people lose faith in you as a leader, you're hooped. But managing performance means you need to set those expectations up front is what does performance mean? And that's why those goals are so important. And that's why measuring progress towards those goals is so important, and why providing feedback to the people on your team needs to be from day one a standard practice, both for the team as a whole and during one-on-one sessions. If you don't do a good job of that, you'll find it very, very difficult to lead a team to any sort of success. So that's a really, really good question. I appreciate that.
Thank you. The next question is, Barbara Kellerman is of the opinion that we can only teach the language of leadership. Learning comes from experiencing. What are your thoughts about that?
It's funny. This is the second time this comes up today. Actually, I just got off a call with a colleague, and we had a similar conversation. I believe in something called the skills transfer model, and in that model, and again, I kind of touched on how adults learn a little bit there. That feedback element is critical. Okay, so when you're talking about something like leadership, yeah, of course you can take a course, you can read it in a book, you can attend a webinar like this, and you can learn a lot from that. But in order to really truly internalize a skill or set of skills and the mindset of a leader, it takes more than that, right? And in the skills transfer model, you can't stop at learning the raw knowledge. Then you need to practice that knowledge, have someone observe you practicing that knowledge, and then provide you feedback, right? That reflection. And I talked about the importance of self-reflection. That goes a long way. But the gold standard is having a colleague or a mentor or a coach provide you with that feedback loop, so that the next time you try to practice the skills, you're doing it a little bit differently and hopefully a little bit better. And you've got to iterate through that, right? That's the only way to learn something like leadership, right? It's very, very different than understanding, the buttonology of Microsoft Office, for example, right? That's the kind of thing you find where the button is, and then right? Leading people, there's no more complex system than a people-based system, right? So it is tricky. So I see the comment from Jean there. I agree. You can only teach so much. The rest needs to be experienced and learned, but that doesn't mean you can't be helped an awful lot from guidance, mentorship, and coaching, for sure.
The next question is, do you have any advice on how to ask people you're leading for feedback on your leadership skills?
How to ask people you're leading. So there's a couple things you can do. I suppose that the first thing that I would say is, you need to have that relationship with your people in the first place, right? And I talked about this, is that people won't be vulnerable with you unless you have a relationship. And that puts people in a very awkward spot. It's like, hey, employee, am I a good manager or no? Right? unless you have a very, very good relationship with people, you're not going to get a straight answer. Okay. So you kind of have to dig the well before you're thirsty a little bit on that. The other thing that I would say is that, developing that relationship doesn't have to be hard. And one of the things I like to do is during my one-on-one sessions, which with my staff, I always have a one-on-one with them each week to check in on their goals and what they need for support and where they are. Okay, what kind of headspace are you in? What are you struggling with? And I can learn a lot about myself about when I hear the answers to those questions, right? If I see people struggling in general, then that tells me there's something that I'm missing, right? There's something that I'm not doing. And that's a reflection of your performance as a leader. The final thing, and this is an industry standard tool, is what's called a 360 degree review, where you collect anonymous feedback from your team, your peers, and your managers on on how you're doing. And that's nice because that's objective, and because it's anonymous, you're going to get the unvarnished truth. And ultimately what I'd recommend is a combination of these things to paint a picture of your own leadership skills. And again, I know I've been harping on this, but having a coach or a mentor can help a lot to observe you in action, to provide you objective feedback is super, super helpful.
So we have another question. What is the best way to empower and motivate employees?
The best way to empower and motivate employees, it's a good question. And, you know, every situation is different. But ultimately, probably the single most important thing you can do as a leader to motivate and empower is to trust them. And what I mean by that is trust them to do good work, right? Trust them when they have ideas about how things could be better. Trust them when they say something feels off. If you're overly directive in your approach, and listen, that there is such a thing as an emergency where someone just needs to call the shots and get through a crisis, but too many managers spend too much time in crisis dictatorial mode, right? People are not going to feel ownership for their own work if they don't feel like they have the freedom of choosing how they approach their work. And if you don't listen to them or consider their ideas when they come up, if you really give people the time of day and set incredibly clear goals while not telling people how to do their work, that's phenomenally motivating, right? That lets people show up to work and strut their stuff and really do what they're there to do. And I know in my own experience, when I've had managers and leaders that have balanced being crystal clear on what we are here to do, while at the same time giving me the time and space and tools to do my part as an individual contributor or as a lower level manager, it was incredibly motivating. Yeah. But yeah, well, we'd spend a whole day on that. That's a good one.
Thank you. The next question is, what is your take about leadership and power?
Sorry, say it again. What is my take on leadership and power?
Yes.
So I gave a talk last week on this. Leadership and power are two different things. Okay, power. There are a number of different ways to exercise power, but they're two different things. Power is kind of the ability you have to direct or control, right? Leadership is your ability to kind of pull as opposed to push, right? And there is a relationship between the two, but there's a model of leadership that I like a lot called servant leadership. And in that model, the leader thinks of themselves as a servant to the team. They're there to empower, they are there to support, they are there to problem solve, and yes, to lead, but to lead for the team's benefit, to provide clarity, to provide direction, right? Not to tell them where to go and how to get there, but to really facilitate the team's well-being and to help them achieve their goals. So in servant leadership, you put yourself, it's like you put yourself at the bottom of the org chart in a way. And the man who first started to kind of popularize this idea, Robert Greenleaf, he was a manager at AT&T for 40 some odd years and ended up getting into management research. And one of the things he noticed is that power got in the way of leaders leading. Power gets to people's heads. And he said, if leaders could really put themselves in a position where they're supporters, as opposed to up on this pedestal, their leadership would be better, their teams would be better for it, and the power wouldn't kind of dirty the waters, so to speak. Yeah, another really interesting question. These are great big picture questions. I love them.
There's a question here from Greg Cedric, who is the president of ASEM. His question is, some believe that we now will be faced with a new norm of virtual meetings. Would you have additional guidance on how your recommendations are to be implemented in this new norm?
We faced, yeah, wow, that's a big one. And yeah, I think virtual work and hybrid work is absolutely here to stay. And I guess what I would recommend in terms of this new norm is that there's opportunity in this. Okay, we're using a tool right now. We're using Zoom that it's very easy to do like Q&As and polls and whiteboards, and there's all these things that you can do now that before were actually harder. So I would say, and this is true of any meeting, whoever's running the meeting needs to think about what they're trying to accomplish and use the tools at their disposal to accomplish those things. But it takes preparation, right? You have to think about what are we here to do and how can I take advantage of this environment to better do those things. Yeah, I guess the other thing I would say is that the trend that I've seen is that people have replaced kind of one-for-one in-person meetings with virtual meetings because it's the closest thing we have to the way things have always gone. And I think that it makes sense for people's minds to go there. But when you think about everything you could do in terms of communications, the tools that you have at your disposal, a meeting is only one. Right? I've seen people do some incredible things with recording, short video and audio clips and screen shares. There's the good old written report. So somewhere along the way, we as engineers forgot how to use Microsoft Word, right? Everything's in PowerPoint and in meetings. And that tool is good for some jobs, but not every job, right? So as the person who is trying to convey information or receive information, you got to think through what's the best way to do this. How am I going to deal with people not being able to show up? How am I going to deal with people who are distracted, right? You got to think through the best tool for the job. I do have on my website, there's an article I wrote a number of years ago. It's the Engineer's Guide to Productive Meetings, and I've got a podcast on this too. So maybe I'll work with the ASEM folks here to try to share those with people to provide more guidance. But again, that'd be a great topic for another webinar. I love it. I probably have time for one more question before I've got to run.
I believe we've covered all the submitted questions.
Oh, great. Okay, perfect.
All right. So on behalf of ASEM, I would like to thank you all for joining us for the webinar. I would like to thank Patrick for a great presentation and for sharing his knowledge about how to become an effective engineering manager. Patrick, do you have any closing comments?
Oh, just thank you very, very much, everyone, for coming out. I had a lot of fun. Looking forward to doing it again. Someone asked for the links to the ebook, so I just put those in the chat again, and I'll work to get an email sent out to everyone with that as well in case you missed it, along with the replay. So thank you once more, and if anyone has any questions or wanted to follow up with me, I'd be thrilled to chat with anyone. This has been great.
This concludes our webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody.